run the diagnostics on the port fuselage access panel. The readings are still fluctuating.
Recalibrating sensor inputs now.
Ensure that is logged against the current flight hours.
JADC2 integration shows a clear shift in their air defense posture here.
Some fighter jets you built to win fights.
Must accelerate the fuel chain on this target.
The F-35 was built to change the fight before it even starts. That is the part most people miss. Because when people talk about the F-35, they usually talk about the same things. They talk about the price, they talk about delays, they talk about controversy, they talk about whether it can outturn another fighter in some imagined close-range duel. And in doing that, they usually judge it by the logic of an older air war. But the F-35 was never designed to be understood through nostalgia. It was not built to become a cleaner version of yesterday's fighter. It was built for a battle space where seeing first matters more than looking impressive, where processing information faster matters more than performing for spectators, and where the side that understands the fight first can begin shaping the outcome before the enemy even realizes what kind of threat it is facing. That is why this aircraft became so debated. Because on the surface, the story looks simple. A massively expensive program, a fighter surrounded by criticism, a machine constantly pulled into arguments about cost, politics, maintenance, and expectations. But underneath all of that noise is a more important question, one that explains why so many people still misunderstand what the F-35 really is. What if its greatest strength has almost nothing to do with the way people usually judge fighter jets? What if the real power of the F-35 is not that it dominates the fight in the way older legends did, but that it changes the enemy's timeline before the fight fully begins? That is where this story becomes bigger than the aircraft itself. Because the F-35 is really a story about how air warfare changed. It is a story about stealth, yes. But not stealth as myth, not stealth as magical invisibility. It is a story about reducing detection, compressing reaction time, and forcing the other side to make decisions later, under worse conditions with less clarity. It is a story about sensor fusion, but not as a buzzword. It is a story about turning scattered information into a clearer picture of the battlefield and turning that picture into advantage. And once you begin to look at the aircraft through that lens, the F-35 starts to feel very different. It stops looking like just another controversial fighter. It starts looking like a machine built for a new kind of air war, one where information, timing, survivability, and decision-making can matter just as much as raw speed, altitude, or maneuverability. That is why the debate around this aircraft has always felt so intense. Because the F-35 is not simply asking whether it is a good fighter. It is forcing a much bigger question. What does it mean to win in modern air combat? Does victory still belong to the aircraft that turns hardest? To the one that climbs fastest? To the one that carries the most myth around its name? Or does it belong to the aircraft that sees first, understands first, and leaves the enemy reacting to a battle that has already started slipping out of control? That is what this video is about. Not the easy criticism, not the fanboy mythology, not the recycled surface-level debate, but the deeper logic behind one of the most controversial military aircraft ever built, and why its real strength may have less to do with what happens in the visible fight than with what happens before the visible fight truly begins. If you enjoy deep military aviation stories about stealth, secret programs, legendary aircraft, and billion-dollar failures, subscribe now. On this channel, we break down the most feared, misunderstood, and fascinating military aircraft ever built. And before we go on, comment where you're watching from and tell me which aircraft has always fascinated you the most.
Most people think they already know what the F-35 is. They think it is the jet that became a symbol of modern military excess. Too expensive, too delayed, too controversial, too ambitious. The kind of aircraft people argue about before they even try to understand what it was built to do. And that is exactly why the F-35 is so easy to misread. Because once an aircraft becomes famous for its price tag, every other part of the story starts to disappear behind the noise. The public debate becomes predictable. People ask whether it was worth the money, whether it can outfight older legends, whether it lives up to the hype, whether it should have been built differently, cheaper, faster, simpler. And those are fair questions. The F-35 program has faced serious criticism for years, especially over sustainment costs and availability. In 2024, the U.S. Government Accountability Office reported that projected sustainment costs had climbed from about $1.1 trillion in 2018 to about $1.58 trillion in 2023, while planned use and availability had both declined. So this is not a story where the controversy is fake. The controversy is real. But the mistake begins when people assume the controversy tells the whole story. Because the F-35 is often judged as if it were supposed to be a cleaner, sharper, more glamorous version of the fighters that came before it. As if its purpose were simply to fly faster, turn harder, or win the kind of air combat duel people still imagine when they hear the words fighter jet. But official U.S. Air Force fact sheets describe the F-35A in very different terms. As a multi-role fighter that combines stealth, sensor fusion, and unprecedented situational awareness. The same official descriptions emphasize its ability to gather, fuse, and distribute information at a level older fighters were never designed to deliver. That should immediately tell us something important. The F-35 was not built to become famous for looking dominant in the old way. It was built around a different idea of dominance. And that idea is much easier to miss than a dramatic turn and fight or a heroic reputation built in a different era. Because what makes the F-35 dangerous is not just what it can carry, not just how it looks on paper, not just the fact that it is stealthy. It is the logic behind the aircraft, a logic built around survivability, information, and the ability to create a clearer picture of the battle space than the other side can build in time. The aircraft matters not only because it can fight, but because it is designed to understand the fight earlier, and that changes the entire conversation. Because once you stop asking whether the F-35 fits the myth of the classic fighter, a very different question appears. What if this aircraft was never meant to impress people who still think in terms of older air wars? What if it was built for a kind of conflict where the most important advantage is not how dramatic the aircraft looks once missiles are flying, but how much confusion it creates before the enemy can even piece the situation together? That is when the F-35 starts becoming more interesting than its reputation. Because despite all the criticism, it did not become a marginal experiment. That the Joint Program Office describes the F-35 as part of a major multinational enterprise with partner nations and foreign military sales customers. That does not mean every promise about the aircraft has come true, but it does mean something serious military planners clearly see long-term value in it that goes beyond headlines and internet arguments. And that is the real starting point of this story. Not whether the aircraft is flawless, it isn't. Not whether the criticism exists for a reason, it does. But whether the public has been asking the wrong question all along. Because maybe the F-35 was never supposed to win admiration the old-fashioned way. Maybe it was designed for something colder, quieter, and far more important. Maybe its greatest strength begins long before the fight becomes visible. And if that is true, then the real story of the F-35 is not about whether people like it. It is about whether they understand the kind of war it was built for. And that is where the story truly begins. The easiest way to misunderstand the F-35 is to imagine that it was designed to become the ultimate version of a familiar fighter. A little faster, a little stealthier, a little more advanced. But that is not really what happened. Because the F-35 was built around a very different assumption. That future air combat would not be decided only by speed, altitude, turning performance, or even by who carried the most impressive missile load. It would be decided in increasingly contested environments where survivability, awareness, connectivity, and timing could matter just as much as classic performance. That is exactly how official U.S. defense descriptions frame the aircraft. The Pentagon says the F-35 brings stealth, sensor fusion, and interoperability to enable access in contested environments, while the U.S. Air Force describes it as a multi-role fighter built around stealth, sensor fusion, and unprecedented situational awareness. That distinction changes everything. Because once a fighter is designed for contested airspace instead of clean theoretical duels, the priorities start changing. The aircraft is no longer just a machine that enters a fight. It becomes part of a larger effort to survive dense threats, see what matters sooner, share that picture faster, and help shape the battle space before the enemy can fully understand what is happening. The F-35's official program language repeatedly emphasizes not just stealth, but also the ability to connect, gather, or fuse and distribute information across the force. And that is where the story stops being about a jet alone. Because the F-35 was built for a style of warfare in which the aircraft does not have to do everything by itself. It has to survive, sense, process, and contribute to a larger network of action. That is a very different philosophy from the one many people still carry in their heads when they hear the words fighter jet. Because for a long time, the public image of air power was built around visible drama, fast climbs, tight turns, heroic merges, the spectacle of aircraft fighting at close range, and none of that disappeared from military aviation. But the deeper logic of advanced air warfare moved towards something less cinematic and, in many ways, more unforgiving. If an aircraft can detect more clearly, organize the picture faster, and help friendly forces react earlier, then the fight may already be tilting before the most dramatic moment ever arrives. The Air Force's own descriptions of the F-35A emphasize exactly that kind of advantage, gathering, fusing, and distributing more information than earlier fighters were designed to provide. So when people ask whether the F-35 is exciting in the old-fashioned sense, they may be asking the wrong question. The better question is whether it was built to make older definitions of excitement less relevant. Because the aircraft's importance does not begin with raw spectacle. It begins with the idea that the side which understands the battle space first can make better decisions sooner, force the enemy into reactive behavior, and create a form of advantage that may never look dramatic to an outside audience. If you still expect the defining image of superiority to be a clean dogfight, then much of the F-35 story will feel unsatisfying. But if you look at it as a platform built for access in defended airspace, for shared awareness across services and allies, and for earlier understanding in a fast-moving battle space, then the aircraft starts making much more sense. The program's multinational structure also matters here. The Joint Program Office describes a large network of partners and foreign military sales customers, which reflects how the platform is being integrated into wider coalition thinking, rather than treated as an isolated national experiment. And that may be the most important shift of all. The F-35 was not built merely to fly into danger. It was built to enter a kind of war where the first meaningful victory may come from understanding the environment faster than the other side, connecting that knowledge across the force and creating decision pressure before the enemy can assemble a coherent response. That does not make the aircraft flawless. It does not erase the program's very real problems. But it does explain why the F-35 belongs to a different kind of air war than the one most people still imagine when they judge it. And once you understand that, a bigger question appears. If the F-35 was built not just to fight, but to shape the fight through awareness, then what exactly gives it that advantage in the first place? That is where the story goes next. In modern air combat, the first shot matters. But before the first shot comes the first clear picture. And that is where the F-35 starts becoming something very different from the way most people imagine a fighter jet. Because the aircraft's real advantage does not begin with speed, it does not begin with dramatic maneuvering, and it does not begin with some mythical idea of invincibility. It begins with the ability to collect information from multiple sources, organize it faster, and present it in a way that helps the pilot understand the fight sooner. Official U.S. Air Force material describes the F-35A as a stealth multi-role fighter built around sensor fusion and unprecedented situational awareness, and says its advanced sensor package is designed to gather, fuse, and distribute more information than earlier fighters were built to handle. Official F-35 materials similarly emphasize a single integrated picture of the battle space. That sounds technical, but its meaning is simple. Older generations of air combat forced pilots to work harder to assemble a fight in their own minds. Radar information, threat cues, targeting data, visual awareness, radio calls, and off-board updates all had to be interpreted under stress and then turned into decisions. The F-35 was built around reducing that burden, not by removing complexity from war, but by trying to turn complexity into a more coherent picture for the person in the cockpit. That is one reason official materials emphasize not just its sensors, but the aircraft's processing and information fusion role inside the wider battle space. And that changes the meaning of danger. And because a fighter becomes far more threatening when the pilot is not wasting precious seconds trying to understand what kind of fight is unfolding. Those seconds matter. They matter when threats are layered. They matter when air defenses are dense. They matter when an aircraft has to survive, identify, communicate, and react before the enemy finishes doing the same thing. That is the part people often miss. The F-35 sensors are not important because they sound futuristic. They are important because they are meant to shorten confusion. And in war, confusion is expensive. It costs time. It costs position. It costs initiative. So when the F-35 is described as dangerous, the deeper reason is not that it sees everything perfectly. No aircraft does. The real point is that it is designed to reduce ambiguity faster than older designs. And that can change the balance of the fight before the enemy realizes how much information advantage has already been lost. That is an inference drawn from how official sources describe its sensor fusion, situational awareness, and information sharing role. This is why the F-35 can seem underwhelming to people looking for visible drama. Because what makes it powerful often happens before the dramatic part. It happens when the pilot already has a cleaner picture. It happens when scattered cues become something usable. It happens when uncertainty drops on one side faster than it drops on the other. And that may be the most important beginning of victory in modern air combat. But even that does not fully explain the aircraft, because seeing first only matters if the enemy struggles to see you in time. And that is where the next part of the story begins. Quick question. Do you think the most powerful military aircraft are defined more by raw performance or by what they make the enemy afraid to do? Let me know in the comments. I read them, and they often shape future episodes on this channel. Stealth is one of the most misunderstood words in military aviation. For many people, it means magic, a jet that disappears, a machine that cannot be seen, a kind of technological invisibility cloak in the sky. But that is not what stealth really means, and it is not the right way to understand the F-35. Even official Air Force messaging that pushes back on the idea that stealth is dead frames low observability as important when combined with sensing and electronic warfare, not as supernatural immunity from detection. That distinction matters because the real power of stealth is not that it makes an aircraft vanish. It is that it changes the enemy's timeline. It changes how early they detect you. It changes how confidently they can track you. It changes how quickly they can classify the threat. And it changes how much time they have left to react before the situation starts slipping away from them. That is why the Pentagon describes the F-35's combination of stealth, sensor fusion, and interoperability as enabling access in contested environments, and why official Air Force descriptions keep pairing stealth with situational awareness rather than treating it as a standalone trick. In other words, stealth is not really about becoming impossible to find. It is about becoming harder to solve. And in war, That can be enough to reshape the entire fight. If an aircraft is detected later, tracked less cleanly, or understood too slowly, then every defensive system connected to that process is already under pressure. The enemy is not just looking for a target. They are racing a clock that is now working against them. That is why the F-35 stealth belongs to a larger design philosophy aimed at survivability in dense threat environments, not to a fantasy of absolute invisibility. And the aircraft was built around that logic from the beginning. Official Air Force materials describe the F-35's low observable performance as part of the aircraft's design logic rather than a cosmetic feature, and official program descriptions consistently present stealth as one element in a wider package of survivability and awareness. That should tell you something important. If stealth is treated that seriously, then the military clearly does not view it as marketing language. It treats it as an operational advantage worth preserving. The value is not symbolic. It is practical. The aircraft is harder to detect, harder to track cleanly, and better able to enter places where older designs would face more risk. That does not mean risk disappears. It means the problem facing the defender becomes more difficult, more compressed, and more uncertain. That is the real strategic meaning of stealth. And once you combine that with what we covered in the previous block, the picture becomes much clearer. A fighter that sees well is dangerous. A fighter that is hard to see is dangerous. But a fighter that can build a better picture while making the enemy work with a worse one is operating on a very different level. That is why official descriptions of fifth-generation capability keep presenting stealth together with sensors, information fusion, and connectivity as one integrated package rather than four separate features. This is also why so many public arguments about the F-35 miss the point. They ask whether stealth makes the aircraft untouchable. It does not. They ask whether radar can still detect stealth aircraft. In some circumstances, yes, detection remains possible, which is exactly why official sources talk about survivability and contested access rather than invisibility. The more serious question is not whether the aircraft can ever be found. The serious question is whether it can be found early enough, tracked well enough, and targeted fast enough for the defender to respond effectively. That is a very different standard, and it is much closer to the real world. So when people say stealth changes everything, what they really mean is this: it makes the enemy late. Late to detect, late to understand, late to organize a response, late to turn information into action. And in a modern battle space, late can be fatal to the entire defensive sequence. That is why the F-35 stealth is not some side feature attached to the aircraft story. It is one of the reasons the aircraft can begin tilting the fight before the most visible part of the fight even begins. But stealth alone is still not the full answer. Because being difficult to detect only matters if that advantage can be turned into decisions, positioning, and pressure on the other side. And that is where the real weapon of the F-35 starts to appear. A fighter can be fast. A fighter can be stealthy. A fighter can carry advanced weapons. But none of that matters as much as people think if the pilot and the force around that pilot are still making decisions too slowly. And that is where the F-35 becomes far more dangerous than its shape alone suggests. Because the aircraft's real weapon is not just what it can fire, it is the advantage it can create in the timeline of the fight. Official U.S. Air Force and Joint Program Office descriptions keep returning to the same core idea. Stealth, sensor fusion, connectivity, and information sharing are not separate selling points. They are part of one system designed to build a clearer picture of the battle space and distribute that picture across the force. The F-35 program itself describes the aircraft as more than a fighter jet, emphasizing its ability to collect, analyze, and share data as a force multiplier. That matters because modern combat is not just a contest of firepower. It is a contest of understanding. Who sees the threat first? Who identifies it correctly first? Who knows what matters and what does not? Who reacts with coherence instead of confusion? And once one side starts winning that contest, the rest of the battle begins to bend around it. That is why official Department of Defense language about the F-35 so often focuses on access in contested environments, interoperability, and integrated sensing, rather than simply praising raw performance. The aircraft is valuable because it helps compress friendly decision time while putting pressure on the enemy's ability to respond in time. That final point is an inference from how official sources describe its role, but it is a reasonable one. And this is where the story becomes much bigger than one cockpit. Because the F-35 was not built merely to give one pilot a better day in the air. It was built to help create a better informed force. That is decision advantage in its real form, not a slogan, not a marketing phrase, a different kind of military leverage. Because if one aircraft can help the force understand the environment sooner, then the force can move sooner. It can position sooner. It can prioritize sooner. It can avoid certain threats sooner. It can pressure the other side sooner. And that is why the F-35 does not have to look invincible to be strategically dangerous. It only has to make the other side late. That broader logic is consistent with the Air Force's description of the aircraft's unprecedented situational awareness and the program's emphasis on collecting, fusing, and distributing battlefield information. This is also why people who judge the F-35 only by old images of fighter combat can miss what makes it important. They look for dramatic superiority, but the F-35's deeper value is often quieter than that. It is the value of turning scattered signals into usable awareness. The value of turning awareness into earlier choices, and the value of making those earlier choices available not just to one pilot, but to the wider force. That is a very different kind of power. And it is exactly why official program descriptions repeatedly frame the F-35 as a connected platform, not just a stealth aircraft. Of course, none of this means the F-35 solves every problem. It does not mean information turns war into certainty. It does not mean networks cannot be stressed. And it does not mean the aircraft becomes automatically dominant in every possible scenario. But it does mean that the aircraft was built around a very modern idea of air power. The side that understands the battle space first can start shaping the outcome before the classic image of the fight ever appears. And once you understand that, the title of this video, Stop Sounding Dramatic and Start Sounding Precise. The F-35 does not win before the fight begins. because it's magic. It does so because modern combat increasingly rewards the side that can shorten its own path from sensing to action, while forcing the enemy to operate with less time, less clarity, and worse choices. But that still leaves one uncomfortable question. If the logic behind the aircraft is so strong, why has the program remained so controversial for so long? That is where the story turns next. The criticism around the F-35 is not invented. It is not the product of internet drama alone. It is not just the usual resistance that follows every major defense program. The program has faced real documented problems in cost, sustainment, availability, and modernization. In April 2024, the U.S. A Government Accountability Office reported that estimated F-35 sustainment costs had risen from about $1.1 trillion in 2018 to about $1.58 trillion in 2023, and that overall fleet availability had trended downward over the previous 5 years, with none of the 3 variants meeting availability goals. That matters because it keeps this story honest. If you pretend the F-35's problems are fake, the entire analysis becomes weaker. Critics point to a program that took years to mature, required enormous investment, and still carries a major sustainment burden. The same GAO report said the Air Force had already raised the amount it could afford to spend per aircraft per year, while officials generally agreed that cost-saving efforts were unlikely to fundamentally change the long-term cost picture. So yes, the criticism is real, but this is where a second mistake often appears. People see those problems and assume they cancel the aircraft's strategic logic. They assume a troubled program must also be a strategically unnecessary one. And that conclusion does not really match how the aircraft is being treated by the governments that are actually buying, fielding, and integrating it. In March 2024, the Department of Defense approved the F-35 program for Milestone C and full rate production, a major acquisition milestone that followed years of operational testing and review. That does not mean the program is problem-free. It does mean the Pentagon did not treat the aircraft as a failed experiment. The international picture makes that even harder to ignore. The Joint Program Office describes the F-35 as a multinational enterprise with partner nations and a growing list of foreign military sales customers. Its official site identifies multiple FMS customers, showing that the platform is not being treated as a narrow temporary aircraft bought by one government out of inertia. It is being woven into long-term allied force structures. And that is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath the criticism. A program can be expensive, delayed, and frustrating, and still be central. A platform can have serious readiness and sustainment problems and still be judged indispensable by the institutions planning for future air combat. That does not prove every defender of the F-35 is right. It does show that the aircraft's value cannot be measured only by headlines about cost overruns or arguments about whether it matches older fighter mythology. Because the people making long-term decisions appear to be betting on something larger than a clean public reputation. They are betting on stealth in contested airspace. They are betting on sensor fusion. They are betting on interoperability. They are betting on a platform that fits the way coalition air power expects to fight in the future. The Pentagon's own description of the full-rate production decision framed the F-35 around stealth, sensor fusion, and interoperability for access in contested environments, which is exactly why the aircraft remains strategically relevant, even while its program history remains controversial. That is why the criticism matters. But it is also why the criticism is not the whole story. The F-35 is not controversial because it failed to matter. It is controversial in part because it matters so much, costs so much, promises so much, and sits so close to the center of how the United States and its allies imagine future air warfare. The higher the ambition, the bigger the scrutiny, and in this case, both have been enormous. So the right conclusion is not blind praise, and it is not easy dismissal. It is something harder. The F-35 can be a strategically important aircraft inside a program that has had serious, persistent problems. Both things can be true at once. And once you accept that, the final question becomes much clearer. If the aircraft is not defined by hype alone and not explained by criticism alone, then what is the clearest way to describe its real significance? That is where the story ends. By this point, the answer should be clearer. The F-35 does not win before the fight begins because it is invincible. It does not win because stealth makes it disappear. It does not win because sensors magically solve war. And it does not win because criticism around a program somehow does not matter. It wins before the fight begins in a more precise and more modern sense than that. It was built to enter contested airspace with a lower chance of being cleanly detected early, to gather and fuse information into a more coherent picture for the pilot, and to share that awareness across a wider force. Official U.S. Air Force material describes the F-35A as combining stealth, sensor fusion, and unprecedented situational awareness. While the Pentagon has described the aircraft as bringing stealth, sensor fusion, and interoperability to enable access in contested environments. That combination is the real story, because once an aircraft can survive more effectively in defended airspace, understand more of the battle space earlier, and help friendly forces act on that understanding faster, the fight is no longer starting on equal terms. The advantage may not look cinematic. It may not look like the old image of fighter glory, but it is still a form of dominance. And in many situations, it may be the more important kind. That is an inference from the aircraft's officially stated design logic, but it is the most reasonable way to connect those features into one operational meaning. This is why the title of this video is not really a dramatic phrase. It is a description of how modern air power is changing. If one side sees the environment more clearly, classifies threats earlier, and shares that picture faster, then decisions begin forming sooner on one side and later on the other. If one side is harder to detect and harder to track cleanly, then the enemy's timeline narrows even more. And when those things happen together, the battle can start bending before the most visible phase of combat ever arrives. That is why the F-35 has remained so important despite all the controversy. Not because the criticism is false, not because the aircraft is perfect, but because the deeper logic behind it, still fits what major air forces appear to believe future combat requires. The F-35 Joint Program Office describes the aircraft as part of a multinational enterprise that includes partner nations and a growing list of foreign military sales customers. That does not prove every claim made about the platform, but it does show that the aircraft is being treated as a long-term strategic asset, not as a short-lived experiment people are quietly moving away from. And that is the real payoff of this story. The F-35 matters because it reflects a change in what winning means. For a long time, people imagined victory in air combat as the moment of visible confrontation. The merge, the missile shot, the turret fight, the dramatic display of performance. But the F-35 belongs to a different logic. A logic where advantage can begin with access, with awareness, with ambiguity imposed on the enemy, and with faster decisions made under better conditions. In that kind of war, the most important move may happen before outsiders would even recognize that the decisive phase has already begun. That is an inference, but it is strongly supported by how official sources describe the aircraft's purpose and role. So the clearest way to understand the F-35 is not as a myth, not as a miracle, not as a failure, and not as a machine that can be judged honestly by old standards alone. It is better understood as a platform built for a battle space where stealth buys time, sensors buy clarity, and shared awareness buys pressure on the enemy's decisions. And once you see the aircraft that way, the phrase finally makes sense. The F-35 wins before the fight begins because it was built to make the enemy late. Late to detect. Late to understand. Late to organize. Late to respond. And in modern air warfare, that may be the beginning of defeat. So in the end, the F-35 is not important because it revived the old image of air combat. It is important because it reflects a different idea of what air dominance now means. Official U.S. Air Force material describes the F-35A as a multi-role fighter built around stealth, sensor fusion, and unprecedented situational awareness, while the Department of Defense says the aircraft brings stealth, sensor fusion, and interoperability to enable access in contested environments. That is why this aircraft cannot be understood honestly through the simplest arguments alone. Yes, the controversy is real. Yes, the cost has been enormous. Yes, the program has faced years of scrutiny, but none of that changes the deeper point. The F-35 was built for a battle space where surviving longer, seeing earlier, understanding faster, and sharing that awareness across the force can shape the outcome before the most visible phase of combat even begins. That conclusion follows directly from how official sources describe the aircraft's design logic and operational role. And that is what makes the F-35 such an important symbol of modern military aviation. Not because it is flawless, not because it is mythical, not because every criticism against it is wrong, but because it shows that the meaning of victory in the air has changed. In the kind of war the F-35 was built for, the decisive edge may come from turning information into clarity faster than the enemy can, and turning clarity into pressure before the enemy can recover. That is why so many governments continue to integrate the aircraft into long-term force planning through the wider F-35 multinational enterprise. So the real lesson of the F-35 is not that modern fighters have become less dangerous. It is that they have become dangerous in a quieter, earlier, and more strategic way. The aircraft does not need to look invincible to matter. It only needs to make the other side late. Late to detect, late to understand, late to decide, late to respond. And in modern air warfare, that may be where defeat truly begins. The story doesn't end here. Comment below with the aircraft, mission, secret program, or military aviation mystery you want us to explore next. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. Subscribe if you want more deep military aviation stories about stealth, legendary fighters, secret projects, and billion-dollar failures.